The Big 12 and the ACC face a big gap between the Big 10 and the SEC, and it's only going to get wider.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, realignment, coaching, carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12 with me. We'll have Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, joining me on the show. We'll also hear from AJ Black, Locked On Boston College. We got all sorts of stuff going on. But House v. NCAA is kind of the story in college athletics because it's fundamentally shifting how college athletics function, Drake. And I've talked recently on the show about the widening gap between the Big 10 and the SEC. I think most people are aware of that. And I think this ruling fundamentally impacts that in that it makes the gap larger. I don't know if it's changing everything necessarily other than, how athletic departments function. But every athletic department having to set aside $20 or $30 million a year to pay athletes now and in the past who should have been paid. To me, this is just another obstacle for the Big 12 and the ACC to try and close the gap with the Big 2 actual power conferences.
It starts with money. That's the first thing you need is money to be able to survive based on what the settlement wants. Settlement wants money, and it wants you to dole out more money, not just in the next 10 years, but also in the next 10 years to athletes. $20 million a year or somewhere in that range will be the cap. Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Texas, they say, great, 20 mil, we can do that. Revenue sharing between colleges and their athletes is easy for most universities in the Big 10 and the SEC. Past that, doling out a couple $1 million a year or losing a couple $1 million a year from the NCAA for those schools does not matter. If I am Iowa State today, if I am BYU today, I look up and say, oh, $20 million a year? I don't know if I can allot that. And that is where the gap grows, specifically amongst schools. The conferences themselves, there are Big 12 programs, Utah, Kansas, TCU, that can find ways to reallocate funds to pay $20 million a year. Iowa State cannot do that. That is where the true gap builds, is the back half of the Big 12 cannot do what the front half can. And where does that also grow a gap? In the conference individually. Now, Kansas State looks up. Kansas looks up and says, I can do this. I can do $20 million a year to my student athletes. I can pay off what the NCAA owes and asks of me. And then Cincinnati holds the hand up and says, look, guy, I can't come close to that. How do I now compete with other schools in my conference that can? I'm not sure if that works.
The nightmare scenario in college athletics in the future is the Big 10 and the SEC break off from everything. That this House case and the money being allocated, it feels at least like the NCAA is getting a decent deal because they're not going to have to pay all of the damages owed to the plaintiffs and those affected by the lawsuit here, which are past college athletes who should have been able to make money off their NIL and were not able to, or should have been making money as employees of the department. However, the legal jargon all works out.
Yeah.
Do you see this at all as a potential first step towards the Big 10 and SEC trying to just further leave everybody that's not a major player in college athletics behind?
Yeah, really the first thing, I'm glad you said first thing. First thing I thought of when this was on the table is SEC or Big 10, from Petiti to Sankey. You look at this and you say, I don't know if I need that anymore. I don't know if I need a governing body to tell me what I have to do. And Charlie Baker 6 months ago, his plea to the SEC and Big 10 was, look, if you guys stay put and we eventually go to revenue sharing, there's almost this autonomy amongst conferences where you make your own rules. He said, NIL, transfer portal, like you guys convene on this. Let's all be hand in hand in the effort. That is, to me, a desperation plea to keep the SEC and the Big Ten happy. Almost, you make your own rules as long as you're still underneath the NCAA. How long does that apply to the Big 12 and the ACC? Forever. You need it to. You need that overhead to stay alive. The SEC and the Big Ten are bigger than the NCAA. Spencer, if tomorrow we did Locked On SEC versus Locked On NCAA as two podcasts going head-to-head. I know that's apples to oranges, but for a Locked On scenario, right? Think about it. There's one entity there that people love and chant at games. No one's yelling NCAA at their various football.
It's got 4 letters. You can't even make a good chant with it, right?
No way to
SEC has got a rhythm. ACC. Go Big 12. Like you can come up with. I just came up with all those except for SEC. But yeah, you get the point. Like joking aside, it just doesn't work. And frankly, I think the silver lining to this outcome is the NCAA sticking around. If the NCAA was footed with this entire bill, Drake,
20 billion?
2.7 billion total in damages. If it was all laid at the feet of the NCAA, it could have just gone away, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a term we all know for reasons I can't figure out because none of us are lawyers.
If we go here, the NCAA, had they not settled, would have been out, if they lost the case, 20+ billion due tomorrow. At that point in time,
20?
Oh, yeah. 20
I thought
billion.
the max damages were going to be around like 4.
Oh, no. NCAA wise, they'd been owed 20+ billion. That's why they settled. 2.7 was the baseline on the settlement.
Gotcha. Okay.
So 20 would have been the, hey, and that 20 is due tomorrow. Then we file bankruptcy. 4, they would have probably filed bankruptcy, and that's a bad day.
Yeah, and the reason that would be bad is because then you'd have a power vacuum in college athletics. And many of you might say, well, we already have one. It would be worse. It would be far. You think the Big Ten and SEC are running things now, and they've certainly flexed their muscle with the payout structure of this lawsuit where they're making smaller leagues, some that don't even have football, many that don't have FBS football that are, losing money as their college athletic departments lose money on the net on an annual basis, and they have to backfill it with other costs of the university. They're making those leagues pay millions of dollars a year, and they need to have a seat at the table. Tom Wistersill, the commissioner of the Big Sky, was on John Canzano's radio show recently talking about that, saying, we're frustrated, we're disappointed because we just got footed with this bill for something that we didn't have anything to do with in the past, and then we didn't have a chance to vote on right here, right now.
Bingo. The Big East, Ackerby, the entire week, those
comments, what are we doing?
They've been huge. They have been, hey, by the way, guys, we have no say in this, and we are doling out more based on our current revenue than anybody else, and that's not fair. And again, Ross Dellinger says the estimated $20 billion in damages would likely be payable immediately and not over 10 years like the current settlement is. That's where we almost were. We were almost to, hey, NCAA, it's due today. Goodbye.
Call Jeff Bezos for a loan at that 100%. Point.
This is already bad. It could have been worse. If you're the Big 12, you're not happy. The SEC and the Big 10 are going, 20 million a year? Sure, we can do that. 25 million a year? Why not? But again, if you're Cincinnati, Houston, Iowa State, even one of the original 8, not good. Not good for you.
I don't think it's pocket change for the SEC schools. It's just far more for the big brand schools if you want to apply it more broadly.
Yeah. In Starkville, they're not happy right now.
No, they can't be, because their total amount of athletic department revenue is not the same as LSU or Texas or Bama or Oklahoma or like all these places where you bring in many hundreds of millions of dollars. Like a lot of places have a net revenue of, $60-70 million, which is a lot compared to a lot of universities I know of and deal with at the mid and low major levels in this country for sure. But if you incur $20 million of additional costs, not everybody's got a really wealthy booster like in Oregon, for instance, where you could say, hey, can you go get $20 million? Or, hey, Tennessee fans, can we raise that? I'm just pulling names out of the hat at this point for the most part. But or Florida State, hey, we're working with private equity here. Hey, can we just, can you just kick a little, there's $20 million extra our way is a lot more feasible for those places. That's why the gap I think this is just another step. I don't think it's necessarily the primary. I think realignment's the primary way the Big Ten and SEC have pulled away. But we're just continuing to see these steps where they're just saying, yeah, we're the biggest, we're the most powerful, and you also need us. So what are you going to do about it?
The thesis for me, Spencer, is the more money you have, the more liable you are to be able to play by your own rules. And 10 years ago, that was possible with the money men in the SEC who are bringing the McDonald's bags across the way. Now, the McDonald's bag is open in the air. It is a transparent shopping bag where you say, here's your money, kid. And it's legal.
It's the clear bag you have to bring into Major League Baseball games now.
100%. It's kind of a fanny pack, though. Bag's a strong word. That's a bit too big of a word. And at this point, again, that's my thesis, is the more money you have, the more liable you are to make your own rules. And that is where the Big 12 and the ACC are cut short.
Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. Great stuff as always. It's not all doom and gloom. College football will return eventually, but got to stay up to date on this stuff. We do the best that we can to keep you informed. Drake, thanks as always.
Spencer, always a pleasure.
Speaking of the Big 12, Kansas is one of the teams that can win the Big 12. Isn't it, Drake? Is it not?
They will win the Big 12.
Oh, boy. Hot take alert. We'll talk about how they do that coming up next. Before we talk Jayhawks, let's talk Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor that are looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data, all you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. For a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. YahooFinance.com, the #1 financial destination. YahooFinance.com. That's YahooFinance.com. Kansas is one of the favorites in the Big 12. How do they win the Big 12? What a statement to be making in 2024. Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, joining me here on the show. Let's just start with that question, Derek. What does Kansas need to do to win the Big 12?
Jalen Daniels has to stay healthy. That's bar none. Like, it cannot happen. And last year before, you were fortunate enough that Jason Bean was your backup. I mean, Jason Bean finished top 20 in the country in total QBR last year. Not a lot of the teams have that as a backup. You don't have that this year. You have a really highly recruited freshman in Isaiah Marshall as a backup, and a kid who we saw as the third string come in a little bit last year in Cole Ballard, but you're not as comfortable there. For them to reach that ceiling, Jalen Daniels needs to be healthy. He's been on the field, he's been an electric quarterback. He's been really, really good. It's just we haven't seen it enough. And when you look at the schedule that is in front of KU, they got a little bit fortunate when you're talking about, conference schedule compared to some of the other Big 12 teams, which I think in my mind is a little bit of balancing of last year. Like, you look at West Virginia last year, they won 9 games. I think they only played one team in the top half of the Big 12 last year. Kansas played every team in the top half of the Big 12 last year except for West Virginia. This year, Kansas doesn't have Utah on the schedule. Kansas doesn't have Arizona on the schedule. Yes, they have Kansas State, who's going to be really good, and that'll be on the road. Iowa State they do have West Virginia this year. But getting to avoid Utah and Arizona makes it very interesting here. So I think if Jalen Daniels can stay healthy and they can find enough from the pass rush and enough improvement from defense and special teams, that's how they can get it done with a fortunate schedule.
New offensive coordinator, Jalen Daniels, back at the quarterback position. I have a very consistent rule on this show, Derek, and that's that places that return their head coach, quarterback, and offensive coordinator, I'm a big fan. You got 2 of the 3 there at Kansas. It's why I can't look at them and go, no, I'm just going to ride them up. Like, there is some established level of success that I expect from them offensively, but talk about the offensive coordinator hire that they made after the previous guy, Andy Kotelnicki. Am I pronouncing that correctly? It was poached away by Penn State. What's the situation there now?
Well, the good news is, because of the timing of when that happened, they were able to bring Jeff Grimes, who was previously at Baylor. And a lot of people will know him from his time at BYU because he was the offensive coordinator for the Zach Wilson year when he blew up. And They were one of the best teams in the country that year and had one of the most explosive offenses, balanced offenses with him and Tyler Algier and I don't know, Puka Nacua and whoever else was on the roster. And so he ends up going to Baylor. And like the first year there at Baylor, they have all sorts of success, but then things fizzle out as the years kind of go on there at Baylor. And I don't know. It's hard to take away what happened at Baylor. How much of it was him? How much of it was elsewhere? I think by the end of the year, they had like 5 freshmen on the 2 deep of the offensive line, which that's never a recipe for success. So do with that what you will. But they were able to bring him in at the beginning of December before their bowl game. So he was able to come in, and he wasn't calling plays for the bowl game. They had an interim OC for that point of time, but they were able to have him kind of shadow the offense, get to know the lingo and the play calling. And so, yeah, there will be differences and intricacies of what he wants to do, and the play calling might be a little bit different. But I think the idea here is for him to continue to kind of run their offense with his own little sprinkling on it, basically. And what makes it work a little bit more, the key word, the key phrase, I guess, we kept hearing when Lance Leipold was first hired by Kansas back in 2021 was the term wide zone. We heard that so much on the offense about how that's going to be their bread and butter, the wide zone running game. Well, guess what Jeff Grimes is known for? It's running wide zone. So I think there's going to be a nice, easy transition here. And he's had a lot of success, whether it was that year at Baylor or whether it was the year at BYU. He's been a good recruiting coach and assistant at a lower level that isn't really a big concern for me coming into the year.
I just noticed, by the way, you were wearing a Big 8 Champs t-shirt to record this segment. Can we all appreciate the history that Derek has brought to Locked On College Football today? Most people, myself included, are not old enough to remember the Big 8. I'm sure some in the audience are. That is an excellent piece of apparel right there. Let's talk transfer portal. Lance Leipold had his name tied to a bunch of different jobs in the offseason because he has turned around what has been, quite frankly, the worst college football program in the last 10, 15 years, and he has now brought them to the point where we can utter the phrase and be serious. How does Kansas win the Big 12? What has Kansas done in the transfer portal? They recently added By Job along the defensive line. Let's start there. How big of an impact does he make?
Well, they need him to make a big impact. So they went from having Kyron Johnson, who ended up being a 6th-round pick. They bring in Lonnie Phelps, who was all MAC. They replace him. It gets even more production. Last year, they bring in a Minnesota transfer, Austin Booker. They get even more production. He's all Big 12, goes off to the NFL draft. But this year, you kind of came into the year, and it was like, okay, who's going to be that guy? And one of the defensive end spots, they're set. They've got a guy who's been basically a multi-year starter. They brought in another transfer from Youngstown State in Dylan Woodkey. But at the other defensive end spot, their wide defensive end spot, as they kind of call it, they're a little thinner there. They have had a couple injuries that have impacted them, some that could be season long. They've, have a couple guys who were way deeper on the depth chart last year who are competing for a starting role this year. They do have 2 really good freshmen coming in, Dak Brinkley and Deshaun Warner. Warner's like the highest rated recruit they've ever gotten in the 24/7 sports era. Like he's a top 100 recruit. He's not a guy you normally see at Kansas. He had offers from Michigan and Ohio State. Not a guy you normally see at Kansas. They could get playing time, but those are freshmen coming into what you want to be a Big 12 title race. Enter By Job, who, yes, he doesn't really have a ton of production under his belt, but he has at least a year of collegiate level experience. And when you look at what they did last year with Austin Booker, a guy who in 2 years at Minnesota barely played and didn't really do much and was able to come over to Kansas and have a good enough season to go off to the NFL and be all Big 12 and be drafted by the Chicago Bears, the hope is that By Job can at least follow a little bit in those footsteps. And I mean, he's a former top 100 recruit. So the potential is there. It's just based on all the scouting report and the people I've talked to, he's one of those players who that was based more off potential and kind of his athleticism and everything he was. And he was more of a raw prospect. So if everything clicks, he could end up being their best pass rusher. But if it doesn't click and he needs a couple more years of seasoning, that could be one pitfall of this team, that they don't really have the pass rush necessary to win a Big 12 title.
When I look at this Kansas football schedule for the fall, I describe the first 5 games as a gauntlet adjacent. It's not full-on brutal, difficult. You mentioned missing Utah and Arizona. That's a break, but this is not a cupcake stretch either. Now, you open with Lindenwood, which is a new Division I athletics university. That'll be a win. At Illinois in Champaign, Look, it'll be early season. Illinois might not be great this year, but they won't know that in week 2, at least not yet. You come back home against UNLV, who will be one of the contenders in the Mountain West this year, with Barry Odom and company, at West Virginia to Morgantown. It's not going to be an easy football game. And then come back home and play TCU. I think if Kansas goes 4-1 in that stretch, Derek, they're doing outstanding.
Yeah, the TCU one, and if you're going further down the schedule, there are a couple other schools that get to this, but there are a couple schools in the Big 12 that TCU I'd classify as like, yeah, they weren't that good last season, but they're sitting on talent-rich areas, whether it's like a TCU, a UCF, some of these schools where it's
Arizona State falls into that category.
Would it shock you if one of those teams ended up being a 9-win team or something? No, of course it wouldn't. So it's easy to sit here today and be like, oh, you're playing TCU at home and they didn't even make a bowl game last year. What's the big deal? But we've seen it before with, Gary Patterson years a lot, where they would go like 5-7, 6-6 one year, and then next year they're like 11-3 or something like that. So that's tough to gauge. The West Virginia one, very interesting because that kind of started this whole thing for Kansas, that you go back to year 2 of the Lance Leipold era, so 2022, and it was their second game of the season. They were at West Virginia. And they ended up winning that game in overtime, and it ended up sparking that team making their first bowl game in over a decade worth of years. And there's a famous video that Kansas fans have certainly become familiarized with, where it's on the sideline. It's showing Jalen Daniels after they win the game. Kobe Bryant has the pick 6 to seal it, and he's yelling "New Era." That this was the start of the new era for Kansas. And so I think there is a little bit of a full circle moment in what that could mean. But yeah, that'll be a tough one. Illinois will certainly be tough. They handled Illinois really well last year. Score ended up a lot closer than you would think because they kind of let them creep back in it over the last quarter of the game. Good news is Jerzon Newton, who is their stud defensive tackle, he caused them issues really in the pass rush all day long. But he's gone. And outside of that, I mean, there were a couple breakdowns here or there, but they handled Illinois pretty well. But obviously it's a different thing when you're going on the road than getting to play them at home on a Friday night, which is what they had last year.
October 26th in Manhattan against Kansas State. Winner of that game, you could look back and say that decided which of the two Kansas schools ended up playing for the Big 12 title. Someone in this conference has to win it. It's perhaps the most wide open conference in the country. Kansas very much a player. What a time to be alive. Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely.
Is Boston College going to take a major step back in the ACC, or could they surprise somebody with Bill O'Brien? That's coming up next. Before we talk Eagles, we're talking FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can bet everything you could possibly want for college football right now. Individual games are available to bet. It's not as far away as you think. You can bet win totals, conference title odds, national championship odds, Heisman odds, everything you need. Go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, make every playoff shot count, and get your college football gambling fix as well. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. Let's talk about Boston College for a moment, because this is a team last year that went 7-6 after making a bowl game, beat the American Athletic Conference champions in SMU, who many people felt should have had an opportunity to play in the New Year's Six bowl game. Myself among them, by the way. I thought they had a tougher path to get there than Liberty, who went 13-0. But I digress. This is a Boston College team that lost their head coach. You don't hear that often after a successful season like that, unless, well, he's taken a higher profile head coaching job, right? No, he's the defensive coordinator now with the Green Bay Packers. Jeff Hafley said, this college football thing, not for me. I want to get up to the NFL. So that, of course, in the coaching carousel set off a couple of moves. Bill O'Brien was going to be the OC at Ohio State. Nope, he's going to be the head coach at Boston College. Chip Kelly, he's the head coach at UCLA. Nope, he's the OC at Ohio State, and Deshaun Foster takes over at UCLA, who I talked about on yesterday's show. But I think Boston College is an interesting team because they have one of the lower win totals in the ACC. It's 4.5, and I don't know if it should be that low. That's expecting regression in the eyes of the the FanDuel sports betting community, who, of course, we get our odds from here at the Locked On Network. 4.5, that's a very low win total. There are some conferences where that's the lowest or second lowest win total you'll see from anyone. Every now and then a 2.5 or a 3.5 will pop up, or, God bless their souls, New Mexico, with a 1.5 win total over in the Mountain West. Yes, I assure you that's a real thing. If you feel better about it, hey, first-year head coach Bronco Mendenhall. Just win 2 games. He could make you money. But I digress once again. Boston College is a team. I don't know why that win total is so low. And certainly a new regime coming in, who's a proven head coach, by the way. Last time I talked about Bill O'Brien on the show, I talked about his resume. Go look up his coaching record. Go look at what he did with the Texans or what he did at Penn State. He's won a lot of football games, and he's not coming in to a complete and total teardown and rebuild. And Boston College has done some good things in the transfer portal this offseason. They've brought in 10 guys total, not a big class, but 8 of those 10 guys are coming from other Power 4 schools, and several are going to make an impact this year. So I think that's pretty solid. A couple of those guys came from Ohio State, even former blue chip recruits. Bill O'Brien, who was there for about an hour, said, hey, you want to come play for me at Boston College? You can probably start. And they said, okay, let's go do that. So I think the Eagles are one of those teams that you need to think about if you're an ACC fan, because every single year, last year was Virginia beating North Carolina, just as one example. You have got a bottom tier team that no one expects anything of that beats someone who you do expect things of. I think Boston College can be that team in the ACC this year. Let's take a look at their schedule real quick, and we'll circle back to this after we hear an audio clip from AJ Black of Locked On Boston College. They close with 4 out of 5 games at home to end the year. That's not bad. That's not bad. Now, the start of their schedule, a little bit tougher, but as far as ACC schedules go, I've seen worse. You get a loss out of the way early. Begin the year on a Monday, September 2nd, day before my birthday, as a matter of fact. Boston College will travel to Tallahassee and play Florida State on ESPN, where they will probably lose. That's just a reality. Boston College last year darn near pulled the upset. They're on the road this year, and Florida State's not going to let that happen. So, that'll be an 0-1. But then you go through their first 5 games, and you're saying, well, I see a world in which they start 3-2. They have Duquesne the following week. I hope you win that game. At Missouri. I don't think they're winning that one. And then Michigan State, Western Kentucky. Boston College could get into the heart of their ACC schedule and be a 3-2 football team. Are you ready for that? I don't know. You tell me. Because then they would need to win just 2 games from there on out to go over their win total. And 4 of their final 5, as I mentioned, are at home. Louisville, Syracuse. Then they go at SMU. Then they play North Carolina and Pitt. I mean, Pitt's a solid team. Syracuse should be all right. Louisville's good. North Carolina, I'm not very high on. SMU, they're new to the Power 4 ranks. You tell me they're going 0-5 in those games? Because I don't see it. They played the Virginia schools in the weeks prior. And AJ Black, our Locked On Boston College host, is exceptionally high on the Eagles this year. I think he lays the argument out pretty darn well.
It's AJ Black here. Looking at expectations for the upcoming season, what does Bill O'Brien need to do? He needs to push this team forward. Yes, they went 7-6 last year. Yes, they beat SMU in the bowl game. But what we need to see is some continuity and improvement. The defense looked pretty poor last year. We didn't see a lot of improvement in terms of what they were able to do as the season went along. We hope that the new staff that Bill O'Brien brings in will be able to do that. But Bill O'Brien's an offensive guy. You know, when you look at that schedule, you'll look at some tough teams, but BC has the talent on their roster that could make them a bowl-eligible team. I don't care that they're playing Missouri, Florida State, UNC. You know, this team can shock some teams out there. Thomas Castellanos with Bill O'Brien could be one of the biggest undersold stories in college football. Last year, Thomas Castellanos ran for almost 1,200 yards. He had over a dozen touchdowns with his feet. He threw for over 2,000 yards. The big issue with him, he struggled with his accuracy. What is Bill O'Brien known for? his ability to coach quarterbacks. You have a quarterback with a good skill set that he's going to be able to improve upon and build upon. I expect Thomas Castellanos to take that next step with a good group of wide receivers. That offense is going to be good. And I think this team should win 6 or 7 games this year and set themselves up for a 2025 season where they have a very favorable schedule. So I think a goal for this season should be a bowl game for BC. The over-under right now is 4.5 wins. I think 6 wins is an easy over for this team. I'm not just being a homer here. I look at what they have. I look at a coach that has the experience at both the pros and college level and can do this and bring it to Boston College.
Yeah, he likes him. No homerism to be found. I think he makes a lot of valid points. And look, I go down their schedule. Do I think they're beating Missouri or Florida State, as I mentioned? No, but some of the other names on their schedule. Think about like a Louisville at home. Remember, undefeated ACC champion Florida State went to Boston College last year, could have lost the football game. Boston College fans might tell you they should have lost the football game. So don't tell me that something can't happen there. Let me ask you this question. Between Virginia Tech, Louisville, Syracuse, North Carolina, and Pitt, how many of those games do you think Boston College can win? How many do you think they should win? Just on paper. On paper, Pitt might have higher expectations. North Carolina might have higher profile. Syracuse has got a bigger name quarterback. Louisville had a better season a year ago. Do you think they're losing all 5 of those games? I think the SMU game is already a toss-up. I think Virginia is a game they could win. This could be a 4-2 football team. There is an absolute world in which Bill O'Brien's Boston College Eagles are 4-2 before they get into the meat of their schedule. But knocking Florida State out of the way early sets up for a favorable back half. And I think AJ makes some points that are worth considering if you are a friend or if you are a fan of our friends over at FanDuel. 4.5. That's a win total. I think I'd lean the over. I think they're getting it. I know they're getting at least 2. At least 2. Remember, Michigan State is rebuilding way more, and they have lost way more in the transfer portal than Boston College has in the spring window in particular. Michigan State's been gutted by the transfer portal. That's going to be a rebuild team in East Lansing for Jonathan Smith and company. You got a couple of first-year head coaches who have proven to be successful at the college level, and Bill O'Brien is inheriting a better situation than what they've got at Michigan State. So, and that game is at Alumni Stadium in Chestnut Hill. I'm just saying that could be a 4-2 football team before they play a bunch of ACC opponents. I think Boston College is a team that when you think about programs you don't expect much of, who win a game that make you go, huh? What? I would look at that Virginia Tech game, though it's on the road. I would look at that Louisville game. I would look at that North Carolina game and say, do not be surprised if Boston College pulls an upset. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.